I'm Colin O'Keefe, and this is LXBN TV. My guest today recently published a series of pieces that were highly critical of the NIST Cybersecurity Framework. That guest, joining me to comment on those pieces, is Stewart Baker, the first Assistant Secretary for Policy at the Department of Homeland Security, the former General Counsel for the National Security Agency, and now a partner at Steptoe Johnson, where he is author on the firm's Steptoe Cyberblog. Stewart, we first spoke on the matter of cybersecurity more than a year ago, before President Obama even handed down his executive order on the subject, and you said at the time that something needed to be done very soon on this subject. So now we've had the executive order and then the framework, and you've said that this framework may potentially even reduce cybersecurity. Can you explain why that might be the case?
Yeah, there's actually two things going on here. I think NIST has produced something useful on cybersecurity. It's a very procedural approach to cybersecurity. It tells you identify your assets, you protect your assets, you detect attacks, you respond to the attacks, you recover from the attacks. So very procedural, but they've given some content to what that really means. And in that regard, they have probably given us all about as much as you could expect from a very general set of cybersecurity standards without being very regulatory. So from industry's point of view, this probably modestly advances the ball on cybersecurity. That's the good news. The problem is that they've advanced the ball a little in this regard, and they've slipped way back in another regard. And they say, and here's how you can apply those privacy principles in the context of doing cybersecurity. And what they do at every turn is they say, we want you to do cybersecurity, but if it touches on private information, we want you to slow down, call your lawyer, take special action. And in many cases, that's really going to make the kind of thing that people want to do impossible to do as quickly as it needs to be done. So in cybersecurity, if you're sharing information with other people in your industry about threats, about bad IP addresses, about people who are sending you malware from particular addresses, and you reveal the addresses or the IP addresses or the email addresses of the parties that are sending the malware, that's personally identifiable information. And now you're supposed to ask yourself, before you share that information, have I really scrubbed all the personally identifiable information that I can out of this information sharing effort? And if I can't share that information in a matter of minutes, other people are going to open this that email as well. And so minutes count, seconds count, and instead we're going to be doing this at the speed of the billable hour. That's not a good answer. And NIST has written a very prescriptive, full of should document, and in an area that is not core to cybersecurity, but is instead off to the side. It's a serious mistake on NIST's part, and it's going to harm the effort. It's going to harm industry. I think in the end, this document is a net loss for cybersecurity.
I see, and I think you're alluding to some of the reasoning here, but you called this framework a potential, quote, regulatory disaster as it tries to sneak privacy regulation in under the guise of cybersecurity. Can you explain your reasoning a bit on that here?
So there are two ways in which this document could regulate industry. One is if something bad happens and you are sued, the question will be, were you negligent? Did you do what a reasonable person would do to protect data? And the courts, when they're trying to decide what a reasonable person would do, love government standards. They think that is a pretty good reflection of what a reasonable person would do. And so you face the prospect that if you don't do what's in these standards, you could find yourself regretting it in a lawsuit 5 years down the road. And unfortunately, I think that applies to the privacy standards, which is in Appendix B, as well as to the cybersecurity standards in Appendix A. The second area in which it has a regulatory impact is quite direct. the president's executive order said, I want every regulatory agency to come to me after this NIST document is published and tell me whether they can incorporate the standards into their existing regulatory framework, and if they can't, what legislation they need so that they can. So every single regulatory agency, from FERC to the FCC or the FTC, has now a kind of presidential injunction to add these requirements to their existing regulations, and I think most of them are going to do it. If they treat that injunction as covering the privacy provisions, which I think many of them would be delighted to do, certainly the FTC would, they're going to end up turning this part of the document into an actual regulation. So where it says should, the regulation will say shall. And since, as I pointed out, there are many, many places, and I cover many more of them in the blog item, many places where the effect of the privacy rules is to say, well, we want cybersecurity, but not too much. We're going to end up with less cybersecurity than we have now.
I see. It is going to be interesting to watch this play out, as of course there is still work to be done on this framework, and of course then there is the implementation of it. Once again, that was Stewart Baker of Steptoe Johnson. To read his full analysis on this NIST Cybersecurity Framework, visit SteptoeCyberblog.com. And of course, if you're not already watching us here on LXBN, please visit LXBN.com, where you can find hundreds of these LXBN TV, video interviews, and curated commentary from the LexBlog Network's more than 8,000 members. Thank you for joining me today, Stewart. It's always a pleasure.
It was great. Thanks a lot, Colin.